I like the name Hitflik. Movie star is more interesting. Anyone can be producer. There is no barrier to entry. I had to intern at Midday with zero pay for almost 5 months. There's just too much yes man giri around fame. They're making that talent extremely boring to the talent's audience. He starts any conversation by telling you that he remembers nothing. I could tell his anger. Actors to दुनिया में हर जगह होते हैं. He's show business. Javed Akhtar just needs to be switched on. You know, I've never known movies to be doing well, honestly. Budget बहुत है. जो मन कर रहा है उड़ाओ तुम.
So, hello, Hitflik family. We have with us somebody who maybe could have become an actor because he's that good looking. Somebody who could have become a director or a prolific creator of content because his mind works that way. Somebody who understands films much more better than a lot of us from many perspectives. And somebody whose headlines in all his reviews are so catchy that even when you're turning your page in any newspaper and you see this thing or you in a website, you'll say, "Yaar, ye kya catch line hai?" You know, rhyming the words and everything. So that's Mayank Shekhar, somebody who has a first name and a surname, both sounding like the first name. My introduction to Mayank happens that when you do events and when you do film events, they say, "Yaar, ye panel discussion karna hai, ye karna hai, wo karna hai." Who's going to moderate it and who's going to manage all these monsters together? And the only name which comes is Mayank Shekhar. So it's an extremely challenging profession because managing so many people, everything, and making sure that the conversation remains interesting. Extremely difficult job. So welcome, Mayank, to Hitflik.
Hey, thank you very much, Saurabh, for having me, and really enjoyed your introduction as well. I couldn't have done all those things that you're saying. I'm very happy doing what I do, and that's really the point of my profession in that sense. I like the name Hitflik. I think if Hrithik Roshan had his own OTT platform, we'll probably call it Hitflik. So that's a cool name. And yeah, and I've seen you at these events, and it's been a pleasure knowing you over the years. So when you asked me to come over, I said yes immediately. So thank you for having me.
Mayank, I'm extremely interested in and wanting to enjoy this conversation myself as well. Because you're a writer, so what do you do exactly?
Okay, so that's a good question, and it's a tough one to answer. But I think if I were to put it in one word, it'll probably be that I make conversations for a living.
Okay.
And that conversation can be in the form of the written word, which could be a movie review I wrote, a travelogue I wrote, a profile of an individual I wrote. It could be a conversation that happens really one-on-one that is being recorded. That can be a podcast. That can be a TV show. But yeah, and that's really what I enjoy the most. Sometimes the camera is on. Some of those conversations make it to my column, for instance. But mostly it's just the fact of being in the company of people who I enjoy being around, being in the company of people who are really, really interesting for what they do, for what they say, for how they think. And that sort of adds up to what is actually my profession, which is to be a journalist.
So, but tell me one thing, when you write about somebody, a film review or something, and obviously you won't talk all good about it. And most of the times it's also negative. So don't people feel offended, or how do you handle that thing? Or do you feel that if I likhunga, to maybe somebody's ego is going to get hurt?
No, I think if you come from a space of, at some level or the other, respect, if you give them the time of the day in terms of, I'm not just being totally dismissive. I have spent about 800 words, 900 words to write a review. That means I have allowed that to seep in. And the fact of it not being something that worked for me, if you make that very clear, and for those same reasons, it may work for you. So I am not telling people that you're a moron. I'm just saying I didn't enjoy this, right? And if you do it consistently over time, showing no personal, affinity towards a particular group of filmmakers or a particular group of actors, or favoritism to a point where it's so obvious over time, whether or not you liked it, you just say amazing things. So if you've been consistently honest, at least consciously honest, God knows what's in the subconscious and what's in the unconscious, I think people get it. And so I've never faced too many issues over time. Initially, yes. I think initially people were like struck by this rando 22-year-old kid who's just going around. And I used to be extremely, I would say, dismissive in my early years as a movie critic also. I almost took it as stand-up comedy. I literally loved roasting films. And sometimes as a result of what I watched, those actors and filmmakers too. It made for great reading. But I think you grow up at some point and you're not in the 20s all your life. And then you begin to see the process for what it is, realize how tough it is to pull off a film, realize that, it may seem like it's not for you, but doesn't mean it's not for anyone else. So you can figure where it's coming from, or at least you know where it's going. So you that just becomes part of your writing process. So I think I'm a little gentler now. And therefore I think a better movie critic.
So seeing one of your earlier news, I also want to ask whether, so movie reviews is something which is, for a producer, it's part of marketing, controlling the reviews. कि यार वो मयंक शेखर को संभाल लेना यार वो, because वो मेरी पिक्चर को गलत बोलेगा. It's such a great film, but he's the one who's not going to like it. And unfortunately, then you have to deal with the PROs and everything. So what do you think is happening to the PR world? Is it going insane? There's something called paid PR and everything. What is your point?
No, I think the PR industry that is linked to the movie industry, among all PR industries, not that I have too much experience of the others in other fields, in other corporate fields, of course, but it's a pretty, it's dealt with in a very dumb way. I don't think there is any innovation out there except for managing pieces that will appear in the press and calling people names and saying that this particular person is paid for or belongs to this or that camp or has some personal vendetta. I mean, these are journalists. What personal vendetta are they likely to have, right? Yeah. So it's more about managing reportage to a huge extent, managing time to a point where the people who should be known better, they get no access to great conversations to begin with. So, so then you can manage what they're like in a field. And so my point is, I think it's been dealt with in a way that isn't, where too much mind has not been applied. And it's been going on for far too long. And whereas our movies have improved, hugely, if you compare to, say, the 90s and the 2000s, the PR industry around it hasn't really improved to the same extent. And I don't mean this as a disparaging statement towards anyone in particular. I think it's just the job profile that some people have taken upon themselves to not look beyond a press screening and giving access to movie stars in terms of time to certain journalists, or figuring out how this particular news should not come out and it should be yanked off from either the internet or websites and news sources. So I think there's a lot to be done there to make movie stars more interesting. For instance, instead of telling journalists, don't ask these 8 questions, ask them. They can say no, but if they have a great answer, they'll become more interesting to the people who view them, not just as actors in a movie. That just happens twice in a year maximum. So that's really like an engagement of 4 hours, 5 hours for the rest of the year. You are who you are, right? So I think instead of over managing them in terms of the access that the public has, if you are smart about it, they would become more interesting themselves.
So, and you've been a part of Hollywood as well as Hindi and regional films. You've analyzed everything. In Hollywood, it's all determined by the commerce guy. There is some control of the commerce guy where he can say, okay, no, in Marvel, I want to do this. You hear so many things about studios stopping this, stopping that. But in India, it's driven by the creative person. सर को वो अच्छा नहीं लगा, सर को आपका रिव्यू अच्छा नहीं लगा, सर चाहते हैं आप वो लास्ट वाला बिट बदल दो. So what do you think is the difference between Hollywood and the Indian cinema? I'll not call it Bollywood, I'll call it Indian.
I don't think it changes too much even when you go down south, even if you compare it to Mumbai film industry, which is commonly known as Bollywood. But Hollywood literally is 6 studios, isn't it? Yeah. And literally that is the funnel through which every film will come out of. Yes. Now you can have multiple people who worked on it beforehand, but you have to belong to one of those 6 studios in order to have a wide release, and definitely a global release, or a worldwide release, as it were. Here, anyone can be producer. You can wake up in the morning and you put together these number of people and this particular story. You spend that money, you figure out a way in which you distribute, but there is no barrier to entry, which actually makes the Hindi film industry far more democratic compared to Hollywood. I think that I find personally as a movie buff, and this is purely as a movie buff and not someone who's looking at numbers here, their decimation of their star system, the fact that from the 2000 onwards, you don't see any real movie star barring Tom Cruise, who's a force of nature, and he's the closest that we have to a Bollywood type superstar that used to happen in Hollywood too. It was done by executives, because the executives overdid the number crunching, figured out a way in which why make it about a person, let's make it about a character, in which case the IP never goes away. And so you can keep milking those characters, even if the person who's performing those parts leaves, you can have someone else play those parts. I think they analyzed the numbers and took the creativity and the sheer love of the Hollywood of the 90s that we, like say of a rom-com, of a pure thriller, so it's not like it doesn't exist at all. But I think there's overpreponderance of the blast fests, right? And the superhero franchise formula. Thankfully, because anyone can make a movie here, someone or the other will not make that movie, or they don't have the economy or scale to make those kind of films, because the whole industry is not run by 6 people, right? Or 6 execs. So that's a fundamental difference. Of course, if you go down south, it's even more so. Actually, just 4 or 5 families back in Hyderabad. Literally 5 families run the entire movie industry. So when people keep talking about nepotism in Bombay, I'm like, try to even become an actor in Hyderabad. And of course, a lot of them have broken through that system and the mold and made a name for themselves. But by and large, it looks damn tough, So I mean, each landscape is different from the other. Each is interesting in its own way, and therefore it produces stuff which is so different from the other as well.
But from a Hollywood perspective, what is that one, and you met a lot of people and everything, what is that one incident or actor or film which has impressed you? Incident will be great, but...
I will take this one to the grave in the sense of when it comes to hosting a conversation, making a conversation. I was once in a room with 3 people. I was once in a room with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro.
Wow.
And just the fact of both of them being on the same screen becomes a landmark event in the history of cinema. So if those two are just talking to me, I think that calls for something, right? And it was a moment I will cherish forever, because I don't think it's going to happen very soon to anyone. And I was the only Indian journalist in that situation. Full bragging rights. I'm proud of it.
But what was the behavior? How were they? I mean, what was anything?
So I think the beauty, and I find that I'm not making a pretty controversial statement. I think I find that in the West, because everyone at some level in a city like New York, everyone at some level is successful in their own ways. And, it's a city that sort of, you could be a billionaire and you could still be taking the metro, right? I mean, and you're walking on the street for sure. And there have been so many instances I've seen really, really famous people walking on the street where someone just points and takes a picture from behind and doesn't disturb them, right? I think it's a leveler. Cities like New York are levelers. So no one thinks they're gods. Whereas I find that in the smaller towns that you go to, and it starts from the West, not like small town in the West will be the same thing. You start thinking of yourself as something else, right? Because the world around you makes you believe so. There's an over celebration of mediocrity also sometimes. And so you begin to believe that you're God. I mean, these are the most cool people that you can possibly hang out with. And Al Pacino is particularly verbose. He loves chatting. He can answer for 10 minutes even without a question. And you love hearing him because it's that same baritone, right? That you've grown up on. On the other hand, someone like Robert De Niro, I think he preserves himself for the camera, and he's not excessively a chatty human being, but you can tell there's a warmth about him. And of course, you're struck by the fact of just being in the same room with them, right? But there's something that we learn as journalists over time, and can only learn from experiences, that you forget all of that. Once the conversation starts, you forget everything of who they are. Once the interview's begun, you're actually equals. Otherwise, how will you ever make a conversation? So I remember the beginning part, being extremely nervous before they got into the room. I remember the end part where I'm like, oh, done. So now I can just fawn all over them and get a picture click, something I don't usually do after interviews. I don't remember the middle part because there I was totally performing a journalist job where it seemed like, hoga tu Al Pacino या Robert De Niro अपने घर पे मैं भी तेरा equal हूँ because in this social setting we're equals because that's otherwise how will you make conversation,
and they accept that.
They totally accept that, and I love that about celebrities in the West in general. I find them far more level-headed than I find in a lot of times in India as well. There's just too much yes-man-giri around fame or power in this country, and it could well be because there's a lot of history behind it. Feudalism was an important aspect of our society that never quite left us, and of course there are many. I mean, that's another discussion to be had. But I've usually found celebrities in the West to be far more chilled than a lot of them in this part of the world.
But is it? I mean, there's a saying here कि चाय से ज़्यादा केतली गर्म होती है.
हाँ, वो भी है.
So is it also that कि the actor is sitting cool and somebody will say कि सर आप वो वाला question मत पूछना या ये वाला मत करना, and do they restrict you from that?
I haven't faced it, but I know all my colleagues do. One of the reasons I haven't faced it is because a lot of times I wouldn't do that interview. What's the point? If you're telling me not to ask something, then let me not ask and let me not have that conversation only. No, I can do other things. It's not like if you are not on this particular series of mine, this series will not work, right? And sometimes you respect someone's privacy. Most times, in fact, where I have been like sort of, it's been a hint. I'm like, I wasn't even going there. I hadn't even thought of that. So those you respect because they're not important to your the conversation you intend to have in any case. But in general, there are a lot of bullshit jobs between the real job and that's what they think they're there for, to protect a talent from a certain kind of media coverage, where they're actually not even protecting the talent. They're making that talent extremely boring to the talent's audience. And I don't know whether the talent understands that. Because what's the point of, in interview after interview after interview, especially before releases, where they're saying the same things, the same questions are being asked. Like, why did you even bother wasting that person's time? And why would I, as a consumer, waste my time on something like this in any case? So they don't realize that by all these gatekeeping, you're making a person extremely boring.
So in your interaction, and I've seen a lot of love coming to you in your interviews with Katrina Kaif and actors, and I feel that they respect you as somebody who's asking them questions, and there's a comfort level. So is it because of the experience? Is it because of the years you worked in that? Why is that comfort there?
I think I'm
asking it with envy.
But it's hard for me to answer this question, obviously. That's something you'll need to ask them. But I do know, consciously at least, that I'm not here for a hit job, right? And that I really come from a good space. I genuinely want to know something, right? I'm not here to get some clickbaits and get some reels out of this particular conversation. I would rather that once this conversation ends, no matter when someone watches this, they learn something new about that person. And most of these are very, very overexposed public figures anyway. So it's a tough job to reach them. The only way to reach there is, I think, by seeming honest to your intention. And honestly, the intention is to know more.
No, like I saw your interview with Katrina Kaif and I really enjoyed it because it wasn't the Katrina people were portraying, and it was a little more heartwarming, little more human, and that was something which was very good. But what is your experience? Who's your favorite, or somebody, one of the favorites?
Okay, so it's tough, right? Because you would imagine that if you've spent time with someone, you've had a good time, hopefully for the audience as well. So it's hard to choose in that sense. But the one, and the particular series you're talking about, should let the audience know, it's called Sit with Hit List. And that's where Katrina appeared. And we've shot a lot of interviews on that series.
I like the name Sit with Hitflik. Oh, sorry.
It's called Hit. Yeah, I know. So so if you do one here, you can call it Sit with Hitflik, but I'll have a problem with it. It's too close. I think there's an IP issue here. So this is Sit with Hitflik in any case. I really enjoyed the one with Akshay Khanna.
Oh, nice.
Because one, he is the hardest nut to crack. We also did this because in a way, his team reached out to us, and I was surprised about that. He starts any conversation by telling you that he remembers nothing, which means you have to be over prepared.
Which is true.
Yeah, so you have to steer him into directions that you want. He will tell you things that he feels. So in that sense, he's quite an honest guy. But you can tell by the demeanor that he wishes he wasn't there. So then it becomes, as a conversationalist, your job becomes all the more difficult, challenging, and therefore all the more interesting. So, for instance, if we took a break in that conversation because he wasn't too happy with the aircon temperature, so we took a break. In that break, it's like, he's just smoking a cigarette and sitting there, and I'm also sitting there. There are two people who are supposed to mentally engage with each other for something to show for, right, in terms of an interview. And then it starts, and then it starts again. You know what I mean? So to find someone who, one, has never opened up, to the best of my knowledge, and I think he's opened up a lot in this particular interview that I'm referring to, and then to come out feeling like, for whatever it's worth, it's not possible to do better than this.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
That, I think, makes it a very interesting episode for me. As you can say, for instance, if you sit with a Javed Akhtar, right? And Javed Akhtar now, of course, like literally all the reels that appear on my Instagram are all Javed Akhtar quotable quotes, sound bites everywhere, right? I mean, but when I first met him, which was when I was in my early 20s, and I used to sit with Javed Akhtar in his house and do an interview with him that I would then turn into a column by him. And of course, it would say as told to, but these were on very strong political issues at that time, whether it's a triple talaq or the Ram Janmabhoomi, topic, right? Issue. But I could tell his anger, and this is evening, so there's a silhouette, and his house, one end is completely the wall that faces the sea, so it's just glass, so you can tell the light, sort of the dusk light, and he's sitting there, and he's talking, and he talks with a lot of passion. I'm like looking at him in my early 20s, I'm like, that's the angry young man, right? Amitabh Bachchan is not the angry man. This man is the angry young man, right? And everything he said would be, in logically speaking, a gem of a point to make. And I was struck by that intellect at a very early age. I just love speaking to him in general in life, and continue to see anything that flashes. I'm Javed Akhtar, I click on it now, even now. But those are not such difficult conversations to make because they're ready-made. Javed Akhtar just needs to be switched on. It's like a pravachan. You should just sit and listen. You shouldn't ask too many questions also. Although I'd love to ask him more questions. And at some point, I hope to do a really nice long podcast with Javed Akhtar. If he's listening, please. I hope that happens soon. So so that's the difference. I think the challenge for a conversationalist is not so much the quality of the conversation. I think that will happen depending on the guest anyway. But the reclusiveness of the guest. And the more reclusive they are, the more interesting it gets for you to sort of switch on the camera and start with them.
So I completely agree with you. So in one end is Akshay Khanna and the other end is Javed Akhtar.
I love both.
And so
but for absolutely opposite reasons.
But I guess you're blessed that way, that you're getting to meet so many people. You're doing what you love to do the most. But there are not many people like you, people who are well-read, people who understand the business, people who are articulate. Because there are times when people have the thoughts in their mind, but they can't put it on paper. So I think you're the chosen one as well.
Hey, thank you very much. I mean, I started out very early, right after college is when I started interning with Midday newspaper. And it wasn't something that I had chosen to do. It wasn't my life's ambition or passion, as has become the buzzword.
मैं बड़ा होके film critic बनूंगा.
दुनिया में मुझे लगता है कोई ऐसा होगा जो बैठ के ये सोचता होगा.
अरे मैं moderation करूंगा of all the top.
No. I mean, I sort of veered towards it because of certain things I was doing through school and college anyway, which was I used to almost debate for a living. I could make money enough to...
This is St. Stephen's?
That's the St. Stephen's, yes. So, I represented India at a couple of global tournaments, debating tournaments at the World Championship in Glasgow, at the Australasian Championship. And I was a hardcore quizzer as well. So, would participate in all the quizzes at school level.
So, you had a world other than films also?
I think no, of course I was a movie buff.
Okay.
And I continue to be one. But I think my interest in films really emerges from my interest in the world.
Okay.
And this is a parallel world, but a related world you report on.
Okay.
So it's not I love to know the technical aspects of filmmaking or scripting and performance. All those things are there.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm interested in films is because I'm interested in the world. Because what are films? But in some ways, a reflection, visually, a reflection of the world we live in. So it really comes from there. And my interest in quizzing comes from the same place. My interest in debating came from the same place. I'd never written in school and college. So it wasn't, but then when you do, like when you're in a debate, you write. You may be writing literally 10 minutes before you speak, but that's what you do. You make arguments, which is something that you end up doing even when you're writing a column. It's an opinion and you have to make an argument. Same thing with even a movie review. So I chanced upon it, and what I learned initially was the fact, and that is why I consider Touchwood a blessed job, is the fact that every single day, and I was a reporter then, I could be reporting on any aspect. So one day I could be reporting on the fact that there is a village called Arnal, where electricity just came, but this is freaking 2002-3. Ke paas electricity hai is village mein. So report that particular story, and then next day it could be some freaking electricity problem of the other Parsi colony. I'm like, this is called privilege, and do you think this is an issue? Right? So it could be community reporting. Of course, there's a lot of pop culture reporting as well. It could be in Gaya chasing some freaking person who died.
This was what age was this?
This would be in my early 20s, about 22, 23 is when I started.
St. Stephen's?
No, this is when I left Stevens. This is my first job as an intern after college.
But in Delhi?
No, this is Bombay.
This is Bombay.
Yes, I moved to Bombay. I actually went from Stevens. I went to Jamia to do a mass communication master's program. At the time, it was quite coveted, and I didn't like myself being there for too long, and so I left. I dropped out of there, and then.
But you've been a Delhi boy. DPS Delhi.
That's right.
Yeah. So how did Delhi, Bombay? You got worst of both the worlds. So I guess the best.
I made a choice, right? Okay. So this Delhi Bombay debate kind of ends with me or anyone else, depending on where they live. So if you live in Delhi, what Delhi Bombay debate are you going to do? You've made a choice. Most people can choose to live in either city, but I think if you're reporting on show business, if you're totally besotted by the world of popular culture, and if you're a journalist using that, using tools of journalism to sort of reflect on those aspects, you're better off being in Bombay. Bombay has a lot of issues, of course, as we discussed right before we started this conversation. It's a city full of freaking craters and poor civic infrastructure, but it's full of really interesting people.
So infrastructure and the film industry both are not doing that well in Bombay.
I've never known movies to be doing well, honestly. Having reported on it for almost 2 decades, मुझे आज तक किसी ने बोला नहीं कि बहुत सही चल रहा है. It's like the same thing that some actors tell you, right? That whenever they listen to some script and whatever, not just actors, it can even be crew, and say, सब कुछ ठीक है sir, but budget कम है. We're going to be. I'm like, which person is saying budget बहुत है? जो मन करा उड़ाओ तुम. मैं तुमको जितने पैसे देना हूँ दे सकता हूँ. So it's always been this, right? And it's been through its ups and downs and its own curves. But
no, I've heard this problem with even the Sanjay Leela Bhansali venture. कि यार वो करना है पर budget कम है.
Sanjay Leela Bhansali. Exactly, it's a line to say. So you can get away by paying people less than they deserve, mostly, which I think is a huge problem with show business in general, or perhaps even media at large. They just don't pay for what is creative output. God knows who they're paying, because it's not like there is no money in the system, but it's certainly not going to where something germinates from, where it originates from, not in the same way that it should be. Which explains a whole lot of bullshit jobs that exist to siphon off resources to things that are absolutely unnecessary, rather than spending it on things where you have writers chasing check all their lives, and not just writers, but crew and even performers. It's a sad state of affairs. Unless you're conscientious about this aspect, how do you expect things to improve from a creative point of view?
So tell me one thing, looking at your thing going from 20-something to industry, today when a 20-year-old wants to get into this business, want to become the next Mayank Shekhar, or want to get into reviews, and today it feels so easy na, phone uthaya, review kar diya.
Yeah.
But nuances nahi pata. So what does one do to get into this? What are the
there is literally zero barrier to entry, unlike when I started out.
Yes.
What
was your barrier when you started?
I mean, I had to intern at midday with zero pay for almost 5 months.
Okay.
And if you're working with zero pay for 5 months, that means you're also paying from your pocket.
Yeah.
Because, there's commute involved. So that's the roughing out that one had to do at the time.
Yeah.
If I had access to an Insta reel and a LinkedIn account and a Facebook account, and I just figured out a way in which I can totally market myself and really work hard at producing something which is out of the ordinary, or by which I mean at least not something that's a cliche, not something that everyone else is doing, and not just something for the heck of people clicking on it.
Yeah.
You are involved in it.
Yeah.
You feel like this is what you want to say.
But what are the mistakes generally people do when reviewing or writing something about films? Or what are the don'ts? It could be you, it could be anybody else you've been watching.
I don't know, Saurabh. I haven't given this a thought. I mean, since you're asking this question, I'm thinking aloud because I also don't read.
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I sometimes see a review and say, "ये film जो है, ये उसकी कहानी है जहाँ दो लोग हैं." Yeah, I don't want to hear the story.
I think that is the primary flaw for sure. Is the fact which is even worse when filmmakers do it themselves in trailers that go on for 4 to 5 minutes. Now, what am I left to watch?
Yeah.
I know the whole thing in any case. Likewise, if you're telling me the entire story of a film, some element, of course, will be there in the review, but you should know where to stop. Especially when you want people to watch that film. So don't kill that experience for them. So there is a lot of plot-based reporting that happens when it comes to reviewing.
And you start with
movies.
that and it bores you to death because... And the reason I'm seeing a review is because I've seen the film. I don't need to be explained. So
I think that will happen if a POV is mixing. So if you don't have a point of view, you literally tell the story. But there are times when I have actually told the story to a huger extent than I would otherwise, purely because it's so bad that if I just tell you the plot, you'll die laughing, right? And those are really bad movies, and those are fun too. And the reason you're telling the story is not for me to tell you the story; it's to do some play of words and to make it funny for what the hell just happened. Like, did I just watch it, and how do I unsee it, right? So those are the funny stand-up roast type reviews, which makes sense, and the reason why you're doing it is to generate laughter, because really that's what they did. I just need to tell you what they did, and you'll know what the hell happened, and that's good enough. And there's no analysis to be done beyond that in any case, right? But outside of that, I think yes, I would agree with you, Saurabh. There's a lot of plot telling that happens, which kind of kills the experience, or a reason why a lot of people may not even click on a review because ये सब कुछ बता ही देगा, मुझे तो film देखनी है, right? So then they'll probably stop at the rating or a headline and then move on.
No, I've also seen reviews saying the ex-producer has done a fabulous job in it, and you feel maybe...
How do you know?
Yeah,
or an ex-editor has done a fabulous job. Most times you can't tell an editor's work because you've not seen the rushes. How do you know it was a great job? Maybe it was already tight. So or times when people try to sound more technical, trying to gain some credibility by using certain, but that doesn't happen as often, I think, or to be honest with you. By and large, I think that would be the one permanent flaw. And if that's that's the direction you're taking, then that's not good for the reader.
So you have another skill, which I think it is underrated. In business, it's not, but outside, which is basically moderating. Like I saw you moderating some 5 great directors and, steering it in a way that it's interesting in a live session and people were laughing. And how do you do that?
I really enjoy it. As I told you, if I were to define my job in one word, it would be a conversationalist, right? And the most important aspect of a conversationalist is the fact that you want to know, that you are interested. And unless you're interested in the people you're with, that conversation is not going to be interesting for others either.
But you also commented one director came late, so you had a humor for it and whatever. So how do you manage that?
No, I think the one thing that I do, a lot of it actually happens while it happens. So there's not, you can't overplan this. It will become boring. But one thing I try and keep in mind, and that's not that anyone's asking me for any nuska and advice, but I'm just saying it anyway.
We need some advice,
is to make sure that the 5 people, as much as possible, all 5 get a chance to speak almost at equal length of time. A lot of people forget that. And to not make it about yourself. A lot of people forget that people aren't there to listen to the moderator. They're there to listen to the guests. So, you can keep your opinion to yourself for those 30 to 40 minutes. Save them for later. If you're dying to really say it once in a while, maybe you can push in your little argument, your 2 cents worth, but make it about the guests. And I think people tend to forget that. And those are the ones that really annoy me when I'm watching कि यार यही बोले जा रहा है यार वो 4 लोगों को क्यों बुलाया और 4 लोगों को बुलाया तो फिर वो तीसरे को क्यों बुलाया तो एक वर्ड ही बोला बेचारे ने just because there are a lot of quiet figures in these conversations, so it's very important to then ask them direct questions, so you include them because they will not speak unless spoken to. So these are the basic things I keep in mind, and then the rest is of course the chemistry of that moment, and some people are just gregarious, so you play on that and I try to keep it light because at the end of the day we're talking entertainment. We're not really saving the planet. We're not saving lives here. So, it should be entertaining to the extent possible.
So you'll have a Javed Akhtar and Akshay Khanna in the same session. You'll balance it out.
I will have to. And it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
And that will be a really tough session to moderate. I hope I don't have to do it. It will be a tough one. Yeah.
So, when you Google about Mayank Shekhar, there's one thing which comes out very prominently is your headlines of your reviews. They're really funny. And even if you're not in the mood to read the review because you've not seen the film, but you end up saying, "Arey, ye kya likha hai?" So how do those, is that...
I don't know. I just love, I know a lot of people consider punning as the lowest form of humor. I don't. I think they're funny as hell. Also, if used right. And also, if it's not the only point. I'm not always looking at kaise pun karne ka hai. Is title. It has to happen very organically, and sometimes it doesn't happen. So I don't push it also. You can do something else with it. But we're in the business of engagement, right?
Yeah.
And if the first 3 words of your piece is boring, then don't expect people to engage with you thereafter in any case. I think if I wasn't a movie reviewer, I would have loved to be the guy who writes those lines every week. I think it's Rahul Dakuna who does it every week on the Amul hoarding. I would want these reviews headlines to be at the same level as those catchy phrases that Rahul Dakuna comes up with at the Amul hoarding practically every week. So I enjoy it. It's a bit like copywriting and advertising, I think.
Yeah, it is. Minimal words, but great impact.
Thank you, Saurabh.
You've also written books. Please tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I haven't had a chance to really sit and spend 2 or 3 years to put out a particular book. My previous one called Name Place Animal Thing was a bunch of my writings over a period of time.
For the youngsters, Name Place Animal Thing, please explain what
well, it used to be a game that we grew up on in the 90s. The book itself is divided into 4 parts. So names is basically people that I'm talking about. Places are places very, it's kind of obvious. Animal is the circus called media. So, I analyze, sort of look at the world of media through animals, and things is larger abstract concepts like happiness and things like that, stuff that I think about. And that has been the kind of writing that I've done on a weekly basis for many, many years, which is my column. Which is called MS Word, which is on midday every week. I churn out something or the other on something or the other, right? And this is what I engage my brain with every week over years. So that is the kind of writing that has been turned into books. Even the one before that was actually a collection of movie reviews that had started out on called Bombay Talkies. And of course, some of the stuff that I'll do subsequently will also be in somewhat in that same realm. I'm looking to put together some travelogue, lots of especially to do with India, some traveling that I've done over the past few years to sort of put that together as something that'd be interesting, fun for people to read. A changing India that one sees, and one sees far more in smaller towns than actually bigger cities. I think we've sort of exhausted Bombay and we've sort of exhausted Delhi in terms of, or the West is also exhausted. I mean, when you go back to a city in the West, there's nothing new that you see. It's exactly how it was 15 years ago. But you go back to Indore, you go back to a Bhopal, you go to a Bareilly, you're shocked by the level of, and I don't mean it as improvement or the lack of it. It's just a different city. So that churn, I think, might be interesting to sort of put together in a book. So that's something that I've been conscious of. So so conversationalist, in that case, in here would be a non-fiction writer.
You're absolutely right. Like when I go to a Lucknow, I have to tell them, nahi yaar, I need to see a Gulabo Sitabo world.
Yeah.
Because it's completely changed and there's malls and there's so many things and you want to go to the biryani center but saying, nahi sir, better restaurant, whatever. No, I don't want to go to, I want to go to the heritage.
Because you're seeking nostalgia, but these cities are not living in nostalgia. These cities are totally leaping into the future and there is something homogeneous happening across. Like, there is no particular thing that you only get there. Everything you get everywhere. There is no particular way that people dress. Everyone dresses the same way. They all dress Big Bazaar, I don't think the Big Bazaar exists anymore, but whatever is replaced, maybe Reliance Retail. There is a homogeneity that's happened, which for people who lived there at a certain time and return to find,
missing, or lacking.
Or lacking. But then, you know what? You want people to remain a certain way while you want to live in Bombay. I think there are multiple Bombays now that's happening across India, something that needs to be reflected on. And that's what the book hopes to do.
So, I mean, there's so many interesting incidents in your book. One was a superstar, I won't name him, though you've named him, dropping a journalist and said, no, I'll go on my own. She was uncomfortable. He dropped him and said, now I know where you live and don't write my article. So, there are incidents. So, any incident which you'd like to share, your experience, something notorious, something funny?
No, I think this was funny more than anything else. And this has to do with Salman Khan, actually, which is there in my book. And I'd gone first to interview him back when I was again in my early 20s. And there was a tabloid story that we had run just the night before, which was we got images of some sort of fracas happening in the lobby area of JW Marriott. And there was an event that had taken place right before that. So a lot of paparazzi were returning from there. Some people just clicked because it saw Salman in, the coffee shop, which is in the basement, but you can see it from the top in JW Marriott in Juhu. So they're taking pictures. So we had pictures of something happening and some sort of fracas that took place in the coffee shop that involved Salman. And I put together that story, speaking to the waiters. In that, I was a hardcore tabloid reporter once.
Super.
Not so much the case anymore. You kind of become older. That's all. But my brain is very tabloid even now. So we'd run that story with images. We had the images literally. I'd taken versions of the account of whatever happened from multiple waiters, and then whatever was common is what we put together. And of course, we ran that with the front page in midday that day. And right that day, I had a publicist who got in touch with me who had no idea about this particular thing that has appeared in the paper, got in touch with me to interview Salman because he was shooting in Kanjur Marg, which is very, very far from where I am. I show up, he gets to know it's from midday, he doesn't want to talk to me. So this particular publicist, you know what? Salman may be one of his clients, but is one of his clients. Whereas back then, and newspapers are very important back then, he probably has to deal with me far more because his other clients also will need to be interviewed or written about, etc., etc. I'm like, you've brought me all the way here. Why do you have a word with him, whether he wants to be interviewed at all or to be interviewed by midday at all, right? Because I heard him say midday guy doesn't want to speak, which is okay. Except that why have you been brought here, right? So I'm giving it to this guy and like a ping pong ball is going up and down. So give me 2 minutes. I'll speak to him, give him 2 minutes, speak to him. And then eventually, because he can see this and he can see me standing there, he's like, and he puts a chair there and where the chair is facing a light, very strong light. So I can't see it. So then I just move closer to him. And then I don't know how to start this conversation because when you know someone is totally uninterested and belligerent almost, how do you start a conversation? How do you break the ice? So I can't remember exactly which film it was. I think it was Garv, but I may be mistaken here. I don't know which set
he
that
did
was.
This to you.
I think he did because the movie was not out yet. So that would be leaked. The signature of that particular film. But so now I look at his hair, which is a different color. Says, you colored your hair, Salman. Why, you have a problem? Like, Now I'm just quietly sitting there thinking what to say next. And then I ask him about, now I realize that nothing's going to happen here anyway. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of his. So may as well ask my questions, get some yes/no answer and move on, right? So I asked him, how is it going with the hit and run case? Because it was in news. Maybe I'll get some quote on that. And he said, it's not hit and run case. I said, okay, no, I meant the case about culpable homicide not amounting to murder. you know, and he loses it. Now there is a person who's gone and pulled a chair and sat next to me, a Hindi journalist, and he's not even looking at me. He's blasting the shit out of me to him. Poor guy sitting there and lick. And he is going on. And that guy's wondering, like, what do I do? And I'm just asking my questions, right? So it was hilarious. I think that was a hilarious exchange that happened too early in my career. And of course, I remember it. But fun. I mean, these are things that make your life or your professional life or your job a lot more fun. I mean, he is genuinely the most interesting guy to interview because he's show business, yaar. Actors to duniya mein har jagah hote hain. He's show business.
Yes.
You know, he was a walking, talking show business where forget what is in the conversation. The fact of the conversation itself can be a story. So that's an early memory I have of his.
You'd also mentioned something, a certain director वो controversy बड़े create करते हैं release से पहले. And you knew that pattern कि यार ये release होगी अब ये controversy create
No, so this was, I think you're referring to when I had sort of infiltrated the censor board, okay? Yes. For some reason they asked me to watch movies for censor board, which is essentially a group of 4 or 5 people who watch movies. They're supposed to be from multiple fields, regular, you know, it's like a jury duty in the US, right? And I asked the gentleman the bureaucrat who asked me to partner, like, do you even know what I write about? I'm deeply against the idea of censorship. Forget about the censor board. Right? He said, that is why. Because, you know, he wanted to like sort of make it a little more liberal, just make it a little more relaxed in terms of things being passed. And so he would have me in these conversations after the film, so I could just, you know, get my way by being aggressive, say, kuch bhi nahi hai, chalega, let's pass it, right? This time we managed to do that with a particular film, and that guy says ki, sir, kuch to cut de do yaar, main kaise sell karunga picture ko. So he wanted to create a controversy from a certain cut, which nobody demanded anyway. So I thought, okay, that's quite interesting. That he has a problem with the fact that censor board has not asked for a cut.
So, but what do you think about the censorship? You know, you have this Mukesh before every cinema saying, don't smoke or whatever, and it's become this thing. Then OTT has a different directive. Internet is completely different. I feel it's a little unfair towards the cinema as well. Ki ye bhi chalao, wo bhi chalao. Yahan par I mean, you're watching a great film and suddenly there's a big banner, smoking is injurious to your health and everything. So what is your take on censorship?
Well, the ideal take on censorship is to respect people's freedoms, is to respect someone's age and intellect. So long as someone's above 18 years old, they can decide which government they can have in power. They can certainly decide what they can watch for their entertainment, right? The classification is important. I think children should not have access to a lot of things that they're too young to be exposed to. I totally get that. And technically speaking, the censor board that we have in India is the Central Board of Film Certification. Their job is to certify films. It isn't, at least by the title itself, not to censor movies. I think enough water has flown under the bridge on this issue now. And the bigger problem that the movie industry is facing, and I say movie industry as a generic term, but I actually mean it in terms of the OTT industry. What is OTT? But also a movie industry of its own, right? It's the same people who are making content for...
You call it movie content. Now you can't ignore it.
In general, I think is going through a dark phase of heavy self-censorship. And I hear stories after stories of how they pitch this, and ye to nahi kar sakte, problem ho jayega. There is a legal department within all these studios and all these OTT platforms that censor even before anything can be censored. So I think that is no way for a freer society. And I hope it's just a phase, and I hope it gets better from here on. But who's to say?
So, coming to this, I mean, what do you think is the biggest film of 2024?
Hard to say. I can't think of anything in particular that stands out, right? And that tells you all that you want to know. There would be the big blockbuster types. We're sitting on December 2nd, and Pushpa 2 will be possibly the biggest in terms of the sheer magnitude and the size of release for an obvious reason. It's South North, it's multiple screens, it's a franchise film. Most of them tend to do well, as did Bhool Bhulaiya 3, as did to some extent even the third Singham, right? But no, I mean, when I think of the year, it doesn't strike me as a particularly great year in terms of something so amazing I watched. Few things do come to mind, and think if you were to put a gun against my head, I'll immediately think of Chamkila. I thought that was a beautiful film that had so many things right.
Yes.
You can't wish that many things to just sort of fit in so beautifully. The genre, that's a musical. There's Rahman who's doing it, but Rahman who's also like not making a generic soundtrack, but sound very specific to a particular milieu. You can't have a better actor than Diljit play a pop star like Chamkila. You can't have a better director with such great understanding of the soil of Punjab while he's not from there. So he has a look in also, the outsider's perspective as well as Imtiaz, who sort of bounced back from a lot of stuff that we'd seen of his that weren't of the same level that he'd made before. He knows the point he's trying to make is a point he's made in different ways in the past, especially Rockstar, which is about art and the individual, pain and art, etc., etc. So I think it just came together so beautifully, and the music. I mean, of course, I mentioned the music, and within music, the lyrics. You can't have anyone reflect the Pind of Punjab the way our man. Why am I forgetting his name right now?
Chamkila? No.
Yeah. So you can't have anyone reflect the pain of Punjab or the Pind of Punjab, even when it's pleasure, than Irshad Kamil. Right?
Yeah,
so, I mean, it's just a perfect combination that doesn't happen that often. And of course, Netflix being another one, because that can even be watched by the world at one go at the same time. So I think Chamkila comes to my mind immediately. And the other one, because I'm thinking hard, is from January, which would be Sriram Raghavan's film Merry Christmas. I thought that was a baller. I mean, it was a genre he knows really well. I think the casting really did it for that movie, because I would have never imagined Vijay Sethupathi opposite Katrina Kaif. Someone like Vijay Sethupathi in that situation could look creepy, but he looks so lovable, so adorable. At the same time, it is about a death. So it's fun. It's funny in parts, but it's also macabre. And the fact that they made it in Hindi and Tamil. I watched the Tamil version thereafter. I wish it set the Tamil version in Chennai, by the way. Because the rest of the story got to remain the same and it would become more authentic because everyone's speaking Tamil. But yeah, these are the two movies that immediately come to my mind. But that's also because I'm thinking Hindi films. It's December. By the end of the year, I will certainly have finished my complete watch list of the year. And I have a feeling the best film will not be from Bombay. It'll probably be from Chennai, or probably be from, most likely it'll be from Cochin or Trivandrum, which is of course the Malayalam cinema.
But do you feel sad that there is a Pushpa which will reap so much of revenues, and not even 1% of that revenue will come from all we imagine the film which has been
well, I mean, since cinema has existed, it has always been split between art and circus. I don't know any time since the birth of talkies where it's been any different. There have been cinema movements that have looked at it very artistically. So whether you start with the Cahiers du cinema movement, like, what the French New Wave or the Italian Neorealism, or in our own country, the parallel cinema movement, they've always had a limited audience. I don't think it's ever been a better time for those films than now, purely because of OTT. So there is a whole generation that completely missed out on a lot of films of the 80s. The movement itself started in the 70s of the parallel cinema movement here in India, but there was no distribution and probably one screening that took place on Doordarshan. And if you missed it, you missed it, right? And then the video generation came later. And so there was some element of access there. But I think a library, which is what, OTT is really a video library, the fact that you can go back to it, now you have no excuse, right? So all we imagine light may not have been watched by that many people in theaters, but I also know a lot of people did not go because they're thinking OTT pe to aa jayegi na, tab dekh lunga. So dekh lenge log.
Or maybe they don't know that the films come in cinemas. Maybe
they probably, I have a feeling they didn't even know. The reach of even movie critics like us is not as huge as one imagines. That there is no light. There isn't so much light as we imagine so far as our own influence is concerned. You do your bit. You do write about it. You as you should. That is the job of journalists, to also bring to light things that people don't know as much about, rather than only chasing numbers in terms of readership. But all said and done, the Pushpas of the world are the reels of your day, and those are the things that will make the most conversation, and people will line up to the theaters for those films. So long as they have access to the other one, I think we're fine.
So you said a difference between art and circus. So I'll just discuss one least important part of filmmaking, which is writing. there's a dearth of writer, there's, what is your point on that? And plus, it's one man thinking, like in South, there's passion, there's director writing everything. But I feel it's a separate department in itself, where you could have not just one, but maybe a team of people. That's how Korea cracks it, or things like that. What is your thought on writing?
Well, I mean, at some level, it can be argued that the film is not a writer's medium, right? That is literally the building block, the starting point for a film. But if your starting point itself is flawed, there isn't too far that you can go with a subject in any case. Do we lack great writers? I think a problem that does occur, and this is completely anecdotal, I have no way to support this with numbers, but a lot of writers who'd be better off just being writers want to become directors because there's no glory in being a writer. Nobody knows writers.
But do you think we can do something about it? I mean, there are not enough script doctors. People don't know how to comment on scripts, or people can't visualize that, yaar, ye film aisi banegi. And somebody like you can, but not many can. So.
Well, I have a feeling that if we celebrate people beyond movie stars, which means lead actors, and directors who have, sure enough, captained the ship, as it were. But in every other department, if we shine more light on them, they will see merit in just doing that job really well. So writers will not need to aspire to be directors in order to find the respect that's due to them, or fame. So then it becomes far more like, this is what I do. There are a few of them. And they've managed to really crack the system. They're hugely sought after, and they can then demand a certain fee where just for developing a script, they can spend a year or 2 years and there's nothing else that they're working on, right? They don't need to be hustlers all the time. So that is necessary, I feel. And some of that can happen with platforms like yours, right? I mean, Hitflik is, from what I can tell in this particular room, is a passion project to start with.
Yeah.
And you genuinely care for films, then you will care for people who are behind those films. And if you sort of, shine a light on their lives, I just don't mean you, Saurabh. I mean, why should I put all the life's burdens on you?
Yeah.
You should do what you love doing. But it'd be great if there were more people like you sort of doing that. And then it becomes, I don't think it's only about the money. I don't think people join this profession just for the money.
Yeah.
It has to be about respect, recognition, fame, perhaps.
I've never seen, I feel it's the toughest job in the whole world, because if for a 40-day shoot, there are people just aligning and putting all their blood and sweat for a 40-day work. But the kind of passion they put, or the effort they put, it's unparalleled. That's what I feel.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you.
But one parting was, what do you think the industry needs to improve on? I mean, in 2024 or 25, by the time people will see this podcast.
I mean, who am I to say what it needs? I think it'll figure out its own way, as it always has. Definitely need more people who are driven by the idea of cinema itself, which is not to say there aren't too many of those. There are, but not simply the commerce of it, but also the creativity, the pushing the boundaries, as it were. And those people have to be stakeholders in the system at very, very powerful positions. Yeah. For instance, what Netflix does in the US is really take its roster seriously to see if it can really push it to the Oscars every year. They want to produce films by becoming the producers with the most number of Oscar nominations in a year. They work towards it. They figure out talents for it. They match those talents with the directors, etc., etc. They put these projects down, and quite often they are the producers with the most number of Oscar nominations. The same Netflix that exists in India should also try to do the same thing.
You mean for Filmfare?
Well, no, for the Oscars.
For the Oscars.
Yeah. Why? Why not? And technically, anything that is produced here can be watched by the world in any case. And why Oscars? I'm saying the top film festivals. Yeah. So, I mean, you are like that in the West or in the US, but you become something else here. Why? So I think what I'm trying to say is that there needs to be a lot of very well-meaning cinema buffs who are at the top, and who can see beyond simply the numbers, but leave behind a legacy. Right. The other thing I wish the movie industry did more about, and I mean that from also the audience's perspective, give more respect to producers. Give them more recognition. What is the incentive for a producer to put in their money on someone's serious art and get not 1 rupee back? And the director becomes the sunshine of everyone's eyes. They become famous, as they should. But this poor guy does the most thankless job ever. So I think we need to push the producers to incentivize them to take bigger risks. Because if everything again is not the money, right? There's far more money in footwear industry. You can be there, right? Films, I think 40 times will be footwear industry, if not 400 times for all I know. Right? So it's not just the money that people are driven by. I think people are driven far more by respect, recognition, and fame, as I said. And I think it needs to go far more to the producer who's putting the neck on the line. And I think it's the only job where the employer also feels like a freaking employee at the same time. They take shit from superstars who they're paying in the first place, right? So we keep talking about writers and all the other people in the crew, but I think especially when it comes to a little more middle of the road cinema or a little more artistic cinema, for lack of a better way of putting it, the producer needs to be highlighted far more. Then they have a reason to invest far more.
So, but do you also feel like when you have to become an architect, you have to have a certain qualification, or when you have to become something, you have to be an MBA? But in our industry, there's no entry barrier. So do you think there should be an entry barrier to become a producer, a director, or somebody? I mean, anybody with money can today make a film.
Well, I mean, most art can be self-taught. And just because, and which can also be said about business. You could do an MBA, but did Dhirubhai Ambani need an MBA to be in the business? No, right? It was his particular talent for what he was chasing and what he managed to achieve. So I would put too much premium in curriculum in terms of education. But you need to learn. Hell yeah. And you learn on the job. Yes, you can. You can also go to a film school, right? And you can also go to a premier institute, and that gives you the environment where there's nothing else you're doing on that day but just learning a particular thing. So how can that ever be a detriment? Right? So that's a good thing. But I don't think you can put a barrier in terms of education for entry into fields such as the arts that we're talking about here. Some people are just talented, some people aren't. Some people are hardworking, some people aren't. Some people are disciplined, some people aren't. And some people just, have it in them, and that's what it is.
Cool. So, Mayank, I don't think I've completed even half the question I wanted to ask, but there's so many things to ask from you. But I guess I don't want to make it too boring that, yaar, ye to chalta hi ja raha hai, whatever. So, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me, Saurabh.
One of the most interesting podcasts I've experienced. And I think you conduct your masterclasses and podcasts. But I'm luckier than you that I got to know you and your perspective.
But I have to say, I'm much more fun on the other side.
Is it?
I don't know whether I'm much more fun, but certainly I have much more fun being on the other side, being a listener. But this once in a while is not a bad evening for me as well. It was fabulous to be with you, Saurabh, and thank you so much for having me.
In fact, the session should do your podcast rather than the other way around. That's so much interesting as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.